Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. Last week, I did a video for $15 where my menu fed a family of 4 dinners for a week. I featured lots of beans and rice, and it's got me thinking about Dave Ramsey. I follow a lot of his principles for money management, and it's been really good for me. Anyway, on the show, when they're talking about how to save money on food, they always say eat beans and rice and beans, because they are 2 of the least expensive food staples, and I couldn't agree more. But what I've discovered is that those meals don't have to be boring and mundane. It can be exciting and adventurous. There are so many delicious recipes to be made with these inexpensive ingredients, and today I'm going to share one of those recipes. I spotted a very popular recipe from the New York Times. It has over 8,000 5-star reviews, and it includes a lot of the foods that I like to eat. For this recipe, I'll be using dried chickpeas, but you can use canned if you prefer, and you would need 2 cans. I'm using coconut milk, a can of pumpkin, some cilantro, lime, jalapeno, and ginger. And I'll be using some garlic as well. And for dry spices, I have some bay leaves, turmeric, and garam masala, which I have come to love over the last year. And I'm also going to be using ground cumin. And then I'll just use some salt to taste. Oh, and I'm also going to be using half of an onion. I'm not showing it here, but I'll be using that. And this is definitely an interesting combination of flavors. I'll be using 2 cups of dried chickpeas that I'll be boiling until tender. But like I said, if you want to use 2 cans of chickpeas, you can do that instead. There are lots of aromatics in this dish that are going to create layered flavors. I'll put the original recipe for you in the description area. The recipe calls for 1 onion. I'm just using half of a small one, and then it also calls for 1 jalapeno. I'm only going to be using half, and I'm going to de-seed it and chop it into very small pieces so that it won't be too obtrusive in any one bite, if you get what I'm saying. I don't usually modify a recipe on the first go around, but I am taking a little bit of a liberty with this. For some reason, I'm having a hard time imagining jalapenos in this coconut pumpkin curry, but it might be good. Before I get started with the curry, I'm going to rinse a couple of cups of rice and then get this going in my rice cooker so that it'll be ready by the time my curry is done. I'm starting by adding some olive oil to the pan, but any oil will work. I'll cook my onions first until they're almost translucent. This recipe feeds 4 to 6 people, and originally I thought I would just make a half portion for myself, which is why I cut down on the amount of the onion, but I ended up adapting this halfway through to go ahead and make a larger portion. And I thought it was very unique that the recipe called for a bay leaf to be added to the oil mixture. I have some chopped garlic and ginger that I'm going to add in next, and the recipe calls for 4 cloves of chopped garlic. But obviously, if you don't have the garlic, you can always add in garlic granules or dried garlic powder. And I minced about 1 inch of ginger. You need 1 teaspoon of ground cumin. You'll add 1.5 teaspoons of garam masala and 1/2 teaspoon of ground turmeric. And I wish you could smell this. It smells so good. I'm just letting the spices cook for a minute or so in that heat, and then I'm going to add the remaining ingredients. The recipe calls for 1 teaspoon salt, but I'm going to start with 1/2 teaspoon, and then I'll add more later if needed. This has such beautiful color. This looks and smells like a perfect dish for the season. Some of my viewers are not able to eat beans, and since really what we just made here is a coconut pumpkin curry, you can add any ingredient to sub out for the chickpeas. For example, you could use potatoes or gnocchi Chicken, pork, beef, really any kind of vegetable would work here with this sauce. While this is simmering, I'll prepare the cilantro and lime. I'll be adding some of the chopped cilantro into the dish, and then I'll also be using it to plate with at the end. We're going to balance out some of the richness in this dish with an acid, and in this case, it's a lime. This is definitely nice and thick. I'm going to give it a taste to see if I need to adjust any of the seasonings. I'm going to go ahead and add the other half teaspoon of salt and let simmer a while longer. The flavors have now had enough time to develop. Sometimes if you try to rush a recipe and eat too soon, it can turn out bland. Anyone that's ever cooked chili knows this. The flavor that you taste at the beginning of cooking is not the flavor that you end up with at the end of a nice long simmer. This already has lime juice in it, but I'm going to plate it with the pieces of lime to add some extra to each plate. This is creamy, and it has a very mild pumpkin flavor. You can taste the deliciousness of the garam masala and that coconut milk. It's such a unique mix of flavors. I really like this. The cilantro lightens it up a bit, and the lime is definitely what makes this dish. It just sets the whole thing off. I could see myself making this again and have this curry sauce over either tofu or potatoes and vegetables. This is delicious. One of my favorite things to cook around the holidays are loaves of sweetbread. It's the one time of the year that I indulge myself with these. I like to make lots of different varieties of these loaves. Not only are they great to snack on, but they also make a great holiday gift. Food gifts make the best gifts, and they're super inexpensive to make. There are so many different variations of these breads. They all start with a basic recipe, and then you just switch up the different ingredients that you add in. There's cinnamon nut bread, there's rhubarb streusel, pumpkin bread, mixed berry bread, there's carrot cake loaf with cream cheese frosting. So many different options. If all you have is one egg and your pantry staples like flour and sugar and cinnamon, you can make some delicious dessert bread that your family will love. In one of my $5 food gift videos, I featured a blueberry lemon loaf and banana nut bread. After the loaf has cooled, you just wrap it up in parchment paper and then wrap it like a gift. It's perfect as a gift on its own or in addition to another small gift. Today, I thought it would be fun to make a cranberry bread with orange zest. I love cranberries, and I recently had a viewer that requested more cranberry recipes. I picked up a few bags of these cranberries when they were on sale, and I threw them in the freezer. Here are the ingredients for my bread. I'll be using the juice and the zest from one orange. I've set aside 1.5 cups of flour. I have 2 eggs, I have baking powder, and I set out baking soda, but I later realized my recipe doesn't call for it. Usually bread recipes call for both of these as they're both leavening agents. So now I'm a little worried that maybe it was left out of the original recipe, and I'm hoping that it's going to turn out okay with just the baking powder. I thought about adding it in anyway. Obviously, I don't think it's going to hurt anything, but I'm going to go ahead and make the original recipe the way it's written. I'll be using butter for this recipe, some salt, and some sugar. I just pulled my cranberries out of the freezer, so these are frozen. But I'm going to go ahead and take out 1.5 cups, and then I'll rinse them, and I'll set those aside while I start my other ingredients, and they'll probably be thawed by the time I start cooking. This is a recipe I found from Natasha's Kitchen, and it's a little more complicated than my regular breads, but I love that combination of cranberry and orange, so I think it'll be worth it. For this recipe, I'll be mixing dry ingredients into wet. And I forgot to add my dry ingredients in the smaller bowl, so I had to switch these around. This is actually a mistake that I make frequently when I bake. I always forget this. It's wet into the larger bowl so that you go dry into wet. Anyway, I juiced my orange, but for some reason I didn't get it on footage. But I quartered an orange so that it would fit into my lime juicer, and I have 1/4 cup of orange juice here, along with the zest of 1 orange. You'll need 6 tablespoons of butter. Recipe calls for unsalted, but I'm just using regular because that's what I have on hand. And I'm not going to adjust the salt because it didn't have a lot of salt in the recipe to begin with. And I'm a fan of salt, and like I said earlier, I am indulging myself during the holidays. My butter was frozen, so I did have to let it sit out for a while until it was more pliable, and then I added some sugar and whisked it with my blender. Now I'm adding a 1/4 cup milk to the wet ingredients, and then I'll add this to my mixture. Most bread recipes don't have you beat your butter and sugar. That's more like a cake recipe. However, it does make it very easy to blend up this butter. And yes, I am still using my very old single blade blender. The other blade got bent somehow and then it doesn't fit into it anymore, but it works perfectly well with just the one blade, so I'm not going to be replacing it. Look at this huckleberry shake that my son made me while cooking this. It's more like a healthy shake without the ice cream, but it tastes really delicious and it's so refreshing right now since I have my oven going and it is a little warm in here. We have 2 people and a dog in my tiny kitchen. I think the kitchen is the heart of every home though, and so I really don't mind it. If you coat the cranberries in flour, it's supposed to prevent them from floating to the top of your mixture. So I'm going to make sure that every cranberry has a nice coating on it. Cranberries can be very tart, so I'm interested to see how this turns out with the whole berries, although I do kind of love tart things, but there's a happy balance that needs to happen. This is already beautiful, just like this. It's funny how baking certain foods just put you in the mood for the holidays. I'll be using a bread loaf, but obviously, if you wanted to, you could make some mini loaves here, or you could make some muffins, and I used some butter on my pan along with some flour to keep it from sticking. And then I'm going to spend some extra time making sure that the top of my loaf is nice and smooth. I'll run a spoon in hot water, which helps me to smooth this out without sticking to the spoon. This is after 45 minutes, but my toothpick didn't come out clean, so I think I need about 5 more minutes in the oven. This looks beautiful and it smells delicious. I think it's done. I love the nice golden brown color. And I'm going to turn this out onto a wire rack to let it cool down. I'm hoping it didn't stick to my pan. I'm just going to release the edges with this tool and then I'll give it a few love taps. It's going to take all of my willpower to let this cool a bit before I cut into it. It'll slice easier once it's cooled down. It's still warm on the inside, but it's definitely cooled down enough that I think we can slice it without it falling apart. And now we just need to slather it with some butter. And how good does that look? I love cranberries, so I was really excited about this recipe. It's sweet, but not overly sweet. And the berries have a bit of tartness to them, but not too tart. Overall, I think it's a nice mix. And it doesn't look like we have the problem of the berries floating to the top. So I think the flour did its job. And you can see it better in this picture here. I think if a person likes cranberries, they're going to like this. Some people put a glaze on top that includes powdered sugar, orange juice and orange zest. I didn't want to add that because I don't like overly sweet desserts, but I'll put the instructions for that in the description area of my video. If you tried this and you felt like it was too tart for you, you could always add that over the top. Or maybe if you like sweeter desserts, you would just want to make it that way from the beginning. I think if I was gifting this loaf, I would definitely add the glaze on the top because I do think I'm in the minority for someone that likes to have their desserts less sweet. But for me, this was the perfect balance between tart and sweet. That's it for this week's video. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I hope you're having a peaceful and joyful holiday season. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you Sunday.
Morning has broken, my windows are open. Wanna feel the wind blow through my hair. Which way do I follow? What happens tomorrow? I turn to you and hope you can guide the way. Sometimes I give up, just wanna be on my own. Even in the darkest times, you give me hope. So